My friends, the energy around the Philadelphia Eagles is real, and you can feel it with every snap, every press conference, and every subtle detail in the way this offense is operating. We're talking about a franchise with history, a strong identity, and a fan base that demands more than just wins. It demands personality on the field. And that's exactly what's starting to show at this point in the season. This isn't just about winning games, it's about how those wins are happening. The atmosphere inside the locker room has changed, the messaging has changed, and when Jalen Hurts openly addresses the offensive adjustments, that says a lot. There's understanding, there's confidence, and most importantly, there's alignment. Against the Raiders, the offense didn't just execute better, it looked different. Fewer predictable routes, more crossing concepts, the ball coming out on time, and a level of efficiency we hadn't seen this year. The run game and the passing game finally working together, everything feeling connected, in sync, and purposeful. And don't forget, hit the like button. It helps the channel a ton and shows the strength of a fan base that bleeds green and white. That marriage is something Hurts himself credited to Nick Sirianni and the offensive staff, pointing out how the run game and pass game were finally working in sync rather than existing as separate ideas. That matters, especially when the offensive line hasn't been at full strength. Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens are still not playing at the level we've come to expect. Tyler Steen hasn't been generating consistent push in the run game, and yet the offense found ways to function more smoothly. In a strange way, being banged up forced self-scouting and creativity. The result was an offense that didn't rely solely on talent winning in isolation but leaned into structure, timing, and intent. One of the biggest beneficiaries of this shift has been Dallas Goedert. The red zone tells the story better than anything else. Goedert has already been targeted 6 times in the low red zone this season, which doesn't sound massive until you realize he was targeted only 7 times total in that same area over the previous 4 seasons combined. That is not an accident. It's design. It's intent. And it's why Goedert is on pace to set career highs in yards, touchdowns, and receptions. Some have pointed out similarities between these concepts and what Bowling Green ran last year, especially considering quarterback coach Scott Loeffler's background as their former head coach. And yes, Loeffler deserves some credit. He helped develop Harold Fannin into a player who would go on to be drafted, and it's fair to acknowledge his influence. But this wasn't some overnight takeover or a mystery play caller situation. This looks far more like a collaborative effort, a staff recognizing what wasn't working, scrapping certain ideas, and leaning into others. Hurts giving public credit to Sirianni and the offensive staff is significant, especially when you remember how similar that dynamic felt back in 2023, when trust and cohesion were obvious. All of this is happening while the Eagles are staring at a massive opportunity. One more win, and they clinch the NFC East earlier than ever in the Nick Sirianni era. At this point, the Eagles have an overwhelming chance to secure at least the 3 seed, with an outside shot at climbing even higher depending on how things break. But the message from the locker room has been consistent. Nothing is finished. Take care of business, one game at a time. That mindset matters, especially when December history around the league shows that how you arrive in the playoffs often matters less than how you play once you're there. We've seen shaky Decembers before, whether it was 2017 with questions after Carson Wentz went down, 2022 with late season injuries and uneven performances, or last season when the passing game was under scrutiny. The common thread is simple: get in, then get hot. While the offense is trending in the right direction, the foundation of this team remains the defense, and Vic Fangio's unit is playing at an elite level. Since Week 10, the Eagles rank near the top of the league in nearly every defensive category. They've allowed just 144, 106, and 29 net passing yards over the last 3 games, a combined total that represents the fewest passing yards allowed in a 3-game span by this franchise in 48 years. Let that sink in. And they've done it while missing key players. Jalen Carter has been out. Lane Johnson continues to rest, and yet the defense hasn't flinched. Fangio's credibility inside that locker room is undeniable. Players like Jalen Carter and Cooper DeJean have made it clear that when Fangio makes a call, nobody questions it. That level of trust changes everything. Fangio doesn't force players into rigid roles. He adapts his scheme to their strengths, and that adaptability is a big reason this defense continues to evolve and dominate. Nolan Smith is no longer on a pitch count and has been getting better each week, something that's obvious on film. The return of key contributors and the consistency of the scheme have made life miserable for opposing quarterbacks, and that trend doesn't project to slow down. Even with injuries still impacting the roster, there's a clear sense that this team is finding its identity at the most important time of the year. The offense doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be functional, efficient, and complementary to a defense that already looks championship caliber. That's where we are right now. An Eagles team that has taken its lumps, adjusted internally, and is now staring at a path that could lead to something special if they continue to build on these changes. Do you believe these offensive adjustments are real and sustainable heading into the playoffs, or do you still need to see more before fully buying in? The question now becomes how far this version of the Eagles can really go if these trends hold, because what we're watching isn't just a temporary spark, it's a recalibration of priorities. The offense no longer feels like it's chasing explosive plays at all costs. Instead, it's starting to resemble a unit that understands situational football, especially when the margin for error shrinks late in the season. Jalen Hurts' approach to pressure says a lot about where this team's head is at. When he talks about perceived pressure, he makes it clear that outside noise simply doesn't factor into his preparation. He isn't watching narratives unfold, he's living the process day to day. That mindset trickles down. A quarterback who stays locked and gives the entire huddle permission to do the same, and that's critical when expectations rise. There's also an important context that can't be ignored when evaluating this stretch run, and that's how demanding the schedule has been. The Eagles are dealing with their fifth short week game of the season, the most in the league and the most during Nick Sirianni's tenure. That doesn't excuse underperformance in certain moments, but it does help explain why rhythm has been harder to find. Now, with a bit more continuity and clearer offensive intent, the hope is that the team can finally stack consistent performances. The Raiders game wasn't just a statistical outlier, it was a sign of what happens when decision-making, route concepts, and quarterback comfort align. On the defensive side, the confidence is bordering on intimidating. Vic Fangio's track record speaks for itself, with 8 top 10 defenses over the last decade, but what's happening right now feels different because of the buy-in from younger players. Cooper DeJean and others have openly talked about how Fangio listens to what players feel comfortable running and adapts accordingly. That kind of collaboration is rare at the NFL level, and it creates a unit that plays fast because hesitation disappears. Jalix Hunt echoed that same sentiment, emphasizing that Fangio doesn't force players into roles that don't fit their skill sets. He molds the scheme around them, and that's why the defense keeps getting better as the season goes on. Injuries remain part of the story, but even there, the outlook is more encouraging than alarming. Saquon Barkley returned to practice after being listed with a stinger, Cameron Ladd to his back, and Hurts' ankle issue has been described as a non-factor. Lane Johnson continues to rest, Landon Dickerson has been dealing with a calf injury, and Fred Johnson has been managing an ankle issue, but the priority is clear. Get as healthy as possible for January. On the back end, Drew Makuba's timeline suggests a potential playoff return rather than a rushed comeback, which aligns with how this staff has handled injuries all season. They're thinking long-term, not just about the next game. All of this feeds into the bigger playoff picture, which is starting to crystallize. Seeding scenarios, potential matchups, and first-round opponents are all being debated. But the truth is simple. If the Eagles' defense continues to play at this historic level and the offense keeps trending upward, this becomes a team no one is eager to face. The numbers back it up, the film backs it up, and the confidence inside the building backs it up. There's a belief that once this team gets into the tournament, it won't matter how they arrived, only how they perform when it counts most. That's why the focus remains narrow. Handle business. Stay healthy. Keep building. This doesn't feel like blind optimism anymore. It feels like cautious belief grounded in tangible changes. The Eagles aren't claiming they've arrived. They're acting like a team that understands exactly what time of year it is and what it takes to survive it. Now the real test begins, and every snap from here on out carries weight. If you've made it this far, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, leave a like on the video, and keep it locked here because we'll be breaking all of this down every step of the way as the playoff picture unfolds on screen. What makes this stretch so compelling is that it finally feels like the Eagles are aligned in all 3 phases with a clear understanding of who they need to be to win in January. There's no longer an identity crisis on offense, no guessing about whether the scheme fits the personnel. The adjustments have simplified reads for Jalen Hurts, reduced unnecessary stress on a banged-up offensive line, and allowed skilled players to be used with purpose rather than hope. You can see it in how the ball is distributed, in how drives are sustained, and in how mistakes no longer seem to snowball the way they did earlier in the season. This version of the offense doesn't need to dominate time of possession or light up the scoreboard every week. It needs to be efficient, disciplined, and opportunistic, especially when paired with a defense that is consistently flipping the field and suffocating opposing quarterbacks. There's also something to be said about the emotional state of this team. Earlier in the year, frustration was visible. Body language, sideline reactions, and post-game comments hinted at a group searching for answers. Now, what you see instead is competitiveness mixed with joy. Players are engaged. Coaches are coaching instead of defending decisions. That shift matters just as much as any schematic tweak. Football at this level is too complex and too physical to survive without belief, and belief is clearly returning. Even the way Hurts speaks reflects growth, not just as a quarterback, but as a leader who understands that the season is a marathon with multiple chapters, not a straight line. Defensively, the expectations are no longer just high, they're assumed. When an opposing offense steps on the field, the default assumption is that points will be hard to come by. That's a powerful psychological edge. The pass rush is relentless, coverage communication is tight, and tackling has been consistent. Even without Jalen Carter on the field, the unit hasn't lost its edge, which speaks volumes about depth and preparation. When Carter does return, it only raises the ceiling. And the most important part is that no one on that side of the ball seems satisfied. The hunger is still there, and that's usually the sign of a group capable of making noise when everything is on the line. As the playoffs approach, conversations around matchups will only get louder. Fans will debate which team they want to avoid, which path looks easiest, and which seed feels safest. But history shows that teams built like this one don't need perfect conditions. They need momentum, health, and trust in what they do well. Right now, the Eagles are checking those boxes one by one. There are still questions to be answered, and there will be tougher tests ahead, but the foundation feels solid in a way it didn't a few weeks ago. This is the stretch where legacies start to take shape, where small adjustments become season-defining decisions, and where belief turns into execution. The Eagles haven't proven everything yet, but they've shown enough to remind everyone why expectations were so high in the first place. From here on out, every game is a statement, every quarter matters, and every improvement compounds. And that's really the key point as we move deeper into this stretch. Nothing about what the Eagles are doing right now feels accidental. This isn't a team stumbling into wins or masking flaws with individual brilliance alone. The process looks intentional. The offense is playing within itself, the defense is dictating terms, and the coaching staff appears unified in how it wants to approach games week to week. When those three elements align, you stop talking about ceiling and start talking about sustainability. That's the difference between a playoff team and a team that can survive multiple rounds. What's also encouraging is how quickly this group has shown the ability to self-correct. Early in the season, when things weren't clicking, the response wasn't denial. It was adjustment. Routes changed. Formations changed. Red zone philosophy changed. Even the way the offense attacks early downs has evolved. That kind of flexibility is usually reserved for staffs that trust their players and players who trust their staff. It's not about ego anymore. It's about efficiency and winning the moments that decide games in January. You can also feel how much this defense enjoys carrying the weight. There's pride in it. They don't just expect stops. They expect dominance. When you hold opponents to historically low passing numbers over multiple weeks, that doesn't happen by chance. That happens because preparation meets execution. The communication is sharp. The spacing is disciplined, and the confidence allows players to play fast without overthinking. When a defense reaches that point, it becomes the backbone of the entire operation. The offense doesn't feel pressure to be perfect, and special teams aren't constantly defending short fields. Everything feeds into everything else. And let's be honest, this city understands what a dangerous Eagles team looks like. It's a team that peaks at the right time, blocks out noise, and plays its best football when the margin for error disappears. We've seen versions of that story before, and what's unfolding now carries familiar traits. Not guarantees, not promises, but traits. Toughness, adaptability, confidence without arrogance. That's why the belief is creeping back in, even among those who were skeptical just weeks ago. From here, every game sharpens the picture. Every snap tells us more about whether this team can sustain what it's building. The opportunity is right in front of them, and how they handle it will define this season. There's no need to look too far ahead, because the present is demanding enough. Execute, stay connected, and let the work speak for itself. What keeps drawing me back to this stretch is how calm everything feels compared to the chaos we saw earlier in the season. That calm doesn't mean complacency, it means clarity. The Eagles look like a team that finally understands its margins. They know exactly where they can be aggressive and where patience wins. Offensively, that shows up in decision-making. Hurts isn't forcing throws to prove anything. He's taking what's there, trusting structure, and letting drives breathe. That's a dangerous version of this offense because it shortens games, protects the football, and steadily wears opponents down. When you combine that with a defense that thrives on frustration and mistakes, you get a formula that travels well, regardless of venue or opponent. There's also something important happening in terms of leadership across the roster. This doesn't feel like a one-voice team anymore. You can sense accountability coming from multiple directions. Veterans understand the urgency of the moment, younger players are feeding off that intensity, and the staff is reinforcing it without creating panic. That balance is rare. Too much urgency leads to pressing. Too little leads to missed opportunities. Right now, the Eagles are threading that needle, and it's reflected in how composed they look late in games. As the postseason gets closer, the conversation will naturally shift toward expectations. People will debate whether this team can win it all, whether the path is favorable, or whether certain matchups pose more risk than others. But internally, that conversation doesn't matter. What matters is whether the Eagles can continue stacking disciplined performances. Not flashy ones. Not perfect ones. Disciplined ones. That's how playoff football is won. Field position. Red zone execution. Third down defense. Ball security. All the details that don't always dominate headlines but decide seasons. This stretch is also about trust. Trust that the adjustments made weren't temporary fixes. Trust that the offense can respond when defenses counter. Trust that the defense can hold when games tighten. Trust that adversity won't unravel the progress that's been made. So far, the signs are encouraging. Not because everything has been flawless, but because the response to imperfection has been mature and controlled. Now it comes down to sustaining it. Momentum is earned, but it's also fragile. The teams that protect it are the ones that understand exactly who they are. The Eagles are still defining that in real time, but the outline is clear. Physical, adaptable, confident, connected. If those traits remain intact, this team gives itself a real chance to make this season memorable. This stretch is also about trust. Trust that the adjustments made weren't temporary fixes. Trust that the offense can respond when defenses counter. Trust that the defense can hold when games tighten. Trust that adversity won't unravel the progress that's been made. So far, the signs are encouraging. Not because everything has been flawless, but because the response to imperfection has been mature and controlled. Now it comes down to sustaining it. Momentum is earned, but it's also fragile. The teams that protect it are